And the Cutting Edge is here to welcome Lieutenant Colonel Buzz Patterson. Lieutenant Colonel Patterson was at the Principles Over Politics breakfast meeting today and got some acclaim, sir, very much so. For those that don't know who Lieutenant Colonel Patterson is, he served in the Clinton administration for 2 years, carrying the nuclear football around for Bill Clinton. He has a nice record in the Air Force of, how many years was that, sir?
20 years exactly.
20 years exactly, flying in places like Kosovo and Antigua and all kinds of places. So we're just honored as we can be to have you here on the program and try to make it kind of exciting for you, because you had a lot of great questions at our Principles Over Politics breakfast, but we're going to try to do things that ask you some things that perhaps you weren't asked before.
Sure.
So at any rate, let's. I guess we have to run over some ground that you did cover in the breakfast, but for our viewers, number one, how does someone get to carry a nuclear football?
Well, it's a good question. Actually, you can't apply for the job. They come and find you, and I was one of 6 that was in the White House. Went to the Department of Defense, went through records. They were looking for operators, pilots in my case. To interview for the position, I received a phone call from the White House asking me to come out and interview. This was in the fall of 1995, and it was a 3-day process, a lot of background checks, a lot of security type questions, and was offered the position and became President Bill Clinton's military aide, Air Force aide, beginning in May of 1998.
So did they check you out and make sure you were a card-carrying Democrat before they got you?
No, they actually asked the question whether or not I had voted for President Clinton in the interview process, and I said no, I had not voted. That was about all they asked in terms of politics. They asked a lot of questions about how I would handle certain things. Of course, you have to have the highest security clearance to be the military aide. You have to have the same clearance the president has, because you handle a lot of the same paperwork he handles, a lot of the same issues, a lot of the phone calls that you're call screening for the president. Sometimes you're listening and taking notes, so you have to have the same security background check that the president has. So most of it was about my background. They did look at like credit card, where I was spending my money, they had my tax returns, those kind of things, making sure I did.
Okay. Well, one of the things I was going to ask you about, though, is that when this job came up, did you know about it? Did you hear about it? You didn't apply for it. It was just a call in the night.
It was.
And if you'll repeat how that happened, I think that's kind of an interesting story.
Sure. I was an operations officer, which means I was in charge of the flying operations for Air Force Flying Squadron at Travis Air Force Base in California, Northern California. I was in my office one day, the phone rang, and it was the White House. It was somebody on the other end of the lines, and they were from the White House, calling me to find me and see if I would be interested in the job. I thought it was a friend of mine pulling my leg, so I hung up on him. The phone rang again, and it was in fact the White House asking me to come out to D.C. and interview for the job, which I did a couple weeks later.
We're gonna fast forward here, because it's always interesting how you go through 2 years. And what years did you serve in the White House?
I arrived there in 1996 and left in May of 1998.
Okay. Now, after you went through this, there's a lot of fast forward after that, and so the last 10 years, you're a well-known author, and you're just releasing your 3rd book. Is that right?
That's correct.
First one was called Dereliction of Duty.
Right.
Second one was called
Reckless Disregard.
Reckless Disregard, and the 3rd one's called War Crimes. At any rate, you had three books out there. Did you retire from the Air Force after that?
I retired actually before I wrote my first book. I retired from the Air Force in 2001. Ironically, just prior to 9/11, retired from the Air Force to go fly for Delta Airlines as a pilot. 9/11 happened, and I realized that a lot of what I had experienced in my time in the Clinton White House was resulted in 9/11. So I started writing my first book, Dereliction of Duty, immediately after 9/11, basically. So I was already out of the Air Force, and Dereliction of Duty was released in 2003.
Well, you can answer a technical question for us here. Being that you were prior service, and you served in as a pilot for commercial airlines, after 9/11, did you get called back by the Guard to go back to service? Or
actually, that's a good question. I actually called the Pentagon and tried to come back in. I had turned down promotion to colonel, full colonel, 06, prior to leaving the Air Force. Tried to come back in after 9/11. They said I could come back in, but I could not, would not be allowed to go back in command or fly. So I said at that point, I don't want to come back in and fly a desk. I wanted to come back operationally. So I chose not to come back at that point in time and to serve by writing books and talking about what I believed to have been the case.
Hey, nobody turns down Colonel. Come on, that's Bird, right?
That's right.
Oh my goodness.
That's
Okay,
right.
There'll be a lot of prior service guys out there going, I can't believe he did that. At any rate, one of the things that's pretty remarkable, actually. But at any rate, having said that, there's a couple of real interesting questions that we didn't get answered in the meeting, and I thought maybe I'll just bounce them off your head, and you can say yes or no. It doesn't matter. But one of the things is you saw a lot of things in the White House that were secret, a lot of secret things that happened there. Now, are you under some area to not reveal a lot of what you've already seen in the White House?
What I agreed to do, and I've still agreed to do, is I didn't sign a non-disclosure agreement. What I signed with the White House, of course, obviously, was never to divulge classified information. And I have not done that.
All right.
I talk about my experiences, those things that were personal experiences, and I don't go into the classified nature of surrounding the situation. So the only thing that I am still beholden to, obviously, is not divulging state secrets. And because I think a lot of those programs I was involved in the Clinton White House are probably still in place for the current administration and the next administration. So I talk about my personal experiences, things that I personally witnessed or was involved in. I don't talk about the classified programs that surround the presidency or the nuclear football whatsoever.
Okay, now let's move this. This is going to be challenging for you, Colonel, because I want this. This is not an easy thing going on the cutting edge. One of the things also that people are going to come to say is that you were under some moral responsibility to not divulge what you saw about personal habits and things that happened in the White House. Can you explain, because you did a little bit in the breakfast, explain why there was some kind of conflict going on over the moral aspects of the administration that you were watching?
That's a great question. I'll tell you quite frankly that I went back and forth about whether or not to talk about these things and to write my first book. I really felt, again, I felt a twinge of guilt in doing it. But I talked to a former mentor of mine who's at the time a two-star general in the U.S. Air Force. And he and I had this conversation. I said, "Sir, is it, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the wrong thing if I do talk about this?" He said, "Well, look at it this way. Is it more important that you're loyal to a former boss than it is to be loyal to yourself and be loyal to your country?" Right. And that pretty much put it in perspective to me. It was more important for me to be loyal to myself and to my nation than it was to a former president. Now, if President Clinton had been in office at the time, I would not have written this book, but he was already a former president at the time, so he was not a sitting president, and I think it's important for Americans to understand what did happen in those years. Talking to my former mentor, he was the one that said basically, be honest with your country and your nation and yourself, not to a former boss. So
let's help the young kids out there, because 1996 to 1998, a variety of world events were happening. Can you sort of mention a few in passing that you experienced during your tenure? Sure.
Well, one of the most foremost, of course, was that we really had been attacked several times already by terrorism, going back to 1993, the first World Trade Center bombing, which occurred about 1 month into President Clinton's first 4 years in office. And then in 1996, we also had the Khobar Towers bombing in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, where 19 U.S. airmen were killed. That's sort of the beginning of what I think really was the real war with Al Qaeda. Was the summer of '96. If you recall, we were attacked there. In 1998, we were attacked. Our embassies were attacked twice in Africa, both in Kenya and Tanzania. Several hundred people were killed and hurt in those bombings.
Okay, let's clear something out here, because there's so the Americans in general, they go, those are bad guys and those are good guys. They like to simplify these
Right.
things rather than to make it a possible issue. So what I'm going to mention to you is this: you've got Al-Aqsa Brigade, you've got Hezbollah, you've got a variety of different terrorist organizations.
Right.
How did we know that this was Al Qaeda?
We knew of Al Qaeda. We were able to connect the dots to Al Qaeda in the first Trade Center bombing in '93 by about '95. We also
Did they just take responsibility for it, or?
Well, we made the connections between Ramzi Youssef, who was the mastermind behind the first Trade Center bombing in '93, and We also, in 1995, had a great stroke of luck, I guess it was. The Philippine police raided an apartment in Manila, Philippines in the fall of 1995 that Ramzi Youssef was planning what was then called Operation Bojinka, which was a plot to hijack a bunch of commercial airliners over the Pacific and blow them up. Through the Philippine police actually stumbling upon Youssef's computer, his laptop, and these plans, we were able to connect the dots to Al-Qaeda, at that time Bin Laden. And we knew about Bin Laden and about Bin Laden's plots in December of 1996, so we were putting it all together.
Ramzi Youssef, this is another name that maybe people miss. What number was he in the Al-Qaeda organization? What was he doing there?
Well, Ramzi Youssef was probably their foremost operations bomb maker guy, and also very tightly involved with Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, whose name should ring a bell to most of your watchers as
and
well.
where are they now? Where are these guys now?
Well, both those guys right now are in Supermax prison in Colorado. So
Good. Okay, let's not waste our time on that. I was just trying to bring some little clarity to the people so they know the players involved and how you knew it, and how whether we're in fact we really are identifying Al Qaeda as opposed to Al Aqsa Brigade or the Palestinian Liberation Front or some other organization. Okay, now having said all that, you were here. You are at the White House. Also going on is, of course, the Monica Lewinsky and what else is called? Someone is being. Were you there during the when they were trying to get Clinton out? I
left just prior to the impeachment proceedings in 1998. So I left in the spring of 98.
But you were there preliminarily to the impeachment.
Sure was.
And so, at any rate, can you tell us? I hate to use this. What do you call it when you talk about things that they're probably not so wonderful? But the relationship that you had, or the knowledge you had about Monica Lewinsky.
Well, it goes back to my first few weeks in the position. Actually, back in 1996, I saw an intern that had unusual access to the Oval Office. Let's put it that way. It was Monica Lewinsky. And I was asking around some of the Secret Service agents about who she was and why she was there.
And how long has she been around?
She'd been around at that point for a couple of years. In fact, right about that time, the White House, the people who were trying to protect the president, had her reassigned to the Pentagon. And but she still was visiting the Oval Office quite frequently, even though she was still at this point now working at the Pentagon. So.
But you actually saw her.
Oh yeah, quite often actually.
And you said that she in the breakfast meeting you mentioned she was also aboard Air Force One. Is that right?
Yes. At least one manifest that I'm pretty certain about. So.
Any other players that we should know about that were visiting the president at the White House?
There were others involved.
Paula Jones, no.
At that point in time, Paula Jones was already into the deposition stuff, and in fact, President Clinton, testified in the deposition to Paula Jones the week before, the month before Monica Lewinsky hit the press. That was January of 1998. The Paula Jones thing had already proceeded into legal proceedings at that point in time.
Okay, so you've made a career. We're going to just take the other side now, because we're talking here. So you basically have made a career out of the fact that you served the president, you carried around the nuclear football, and I'm sorry, there was a question there in the lunch breakfast meeting. I have to ask you. You mentioned something about the fact that the president actually lost the codes. Right. Can you explain that in some detail?
Sure. The nuclear codes are a credit card-sized document that every president since John F. Kennedy actually has had on their person. It's the way by which the president, with nuclear weapons, the advent of nuclear weapons, obviously, there needs to be a way by which the president can identify himself as being the commander-in-chief of the Pentagon, and the nuclear codes are this document that allows him to do just that. And President Clinton lost those codes in 1998. It coincided actually to the Monica Lewinsky thing hitting the press, and he just kind of took his eye off the ball. In this case, took his eye off the nuclear codes and lost them. We never did find them. We scoured the White House for several days and weeks, if not, and of course the Pentagon was incredulous because it had never happened before. So there was no process for recovering the codes or creating new codes. So they were like, "He did what?"
You also mentioned that Hillary Clinton was more or less a co-president to this. What was her position about losing those codes? Did she make any mention of it?
She didn't make any mention of it. They were the people that were closely around the president, most notably Bruce Lindsay and the president himself, were more concerned about the fact that he had lost the codes, not making it into the press, into the media. And they were more concerned about that than actually the fact that he had lost the codes.
Okay, we're gonna carry this on quickly, but I got to catch up with just a couple of little last minute housekeeping things. The Vince Foster passed away in what year? Was
He passed away before I arrived there in May of 1996.
right? What did you know? Did you know anything about what happened with the Vince Foster?
Just what I had read in the papers.
Okay.
And then, of course, I got involved on the tail end of that with some of the files that had come out of his office.
All right. Now, in addition to carrying the nuclear football around, which is a very hefty job, you were in charge also of what? Of White House, what other aspects?
Well, kind of operational commander for Air Force One, for Marine One.
So if the president was going to go somewhere, you'd book everything and make sure that
make sure they had all the information, and also, for example, if there was bad weather,
right.
You had to work with the president. The presidential pilot on Air Force One, also the presidential pilot on Marine One. Okay, we're going to divert the airplane. Where are we going to go? Where is there security? In fact, I diverted Air Force One. Christmas of 1997, we were on our way to Bosnia to visit the troops in Bosnia, and weather in Europe was really, really bad, so we had to divert the airplane. So I was involved in that. So it was kind of an operational commander of those assets, basically.
One of the things that you do mention in your bio is regarding flying missions over Yugoslavia or Bosnia. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this is before '96 or after?
It was before. Actually, it was December of 1994 when the Bosnian War was a full blown Serbs via Croats via Muslims, of course. And we had the Dayton Peace Accords the following year, but the years that I was flying in there was 1994.
And can you reveal? Not that it's national security, but can you reveal what kind of missions you were
Sure.
sent on?
At that time, I was flying humanitarian support into the people of Sarajevo, the Serbs that basically closed the city off. In the wintertime, they were starving to death, and we were flying in humanitarian aid, medicine, food, and we were actually landing at Sarajevo Airport and
Right.
dropping it off so that the people of Sarajevo could survive, being basically embargoed by the Serbs.
Did American air power ever use combat missions
Sure.
To take out the Serbs?
Mm-hmm. We were doing that at the same time. We were taking out anti-aircraft sites, and of course, then we had after that we had several operations actually in former Yugoslavia, Kosovo, Serbia, when we actually went to war under President Clinton's second term, actually. Yeah.
After his watch, what did most people in the military think of that whole issue?
Much ado about nothing, really. I think that a lot of us questioned why we were there in the first place. The humanitarian aspect, I was really happy to be there because I saw firsthand it was affecting the people in a positive way. But I think the whole going to war with Milosevic, a lot of military folks questioned that. And I think that was the climate of the time. If you recall, when President Clinton came into office in '93, of course we were involved in Somalia, we were involved in Haiti, we were involved in Rwanda, we were involved basically in every sort of police action you could possibly imagine in those 1990s, and Kosovo certainly was no exception.
Let's fast forward up to that first book. What put your energy into writing Dereliction of Duty, and what's it about?
Well, Dereliction of Duty is exactly my time with President Bill Clinton and how I think he was derelict in his responsibilities as our commander-in-chief. I was flying for Delta Airlines when 9/11 happened. In fact, I was supposed to fly that day up to New York from LaGuardia out of Atlanta. And I remember walking past the TV set and seeing the Twin Towers going down, and I knew exactly what had happened at that point in time. And that I felt it was important at that time to start talking about why we got to where we were as a country and why we had been attacked on that day. And I was out of the Air Force. I could talk about what I'd seen in my time there, and my experiences in the Clinton White House, and I had some friends telling me to go ahead and write the story, and that's how Dereliction of Duty came about. It was released in March of 2003. Did very, very well, and kind of got me started into the writing aspect. I never did anything prior to that.
You were sort of a reluctant author. I think you mentioned that you didn't really want to write any of this, but your peers were the peers that were back at the White House?
The military aid peers that I had been stationed with at the White House at the exact same time and saw all the things that I had seen. There were actually 5 of us. I was the Air Force aide and the senior guy for most of my time there. But there was also a Marine, a naval officer, a Coast Guard, and an Army guy that were also there. So I was one of 5, and then when I was the first guy to retire, could actually tell the story legally, not constrained by the UCMJ. That's how the book came about. They were telling me, you can write the story, we can't, go ahead and do it. And
What would you say to those detractors that would say to you that this is just salacious material about personal things that happened to the president in the White House and that you shouldn't be writing about it?
Well, that's a good question. I will tell you that there's nothing salacious or personal in the book. It's all about my perceptions as an officer about his responsibilities as our commander-in-chief. I don't talk about, I think I mentioned Monica one time in there, only in conjunction with talking about him losing the codes. I don't talk about the many misbehaviors that I experienced with him around Monica and other women. I talk about his failures as our commander-in-chief from a very objective standpoint as being a former officer who served him, but also a former pilot who served him as our commander-in-chief. So I don't go into a lot of the detail, a lot of the dirt that I could have gone into, obviously. So it's not a kiss and tell. It's more of, okay, this is a look back on an Air Force officer talking about the former commander-in-chief.
One of the things that hasn't been covered much about the Clinton administration was their relationship with the Joint Chiefs.
Right. Very, very poor.
What do you mean by very, very poor?
Well, they treated the Joint Chiefs like, well, let me take a step back. The Clintons treated the military very, very poorly overall anyway. There was a very real disdain for the military. I'm not sure hatred probably is a little bit too strong, but a mistrust, an ignorance toward the military. And it was appalling to me as the Air Force aide to the president, when we did have the 4 stars come over, the Joint Chiefs come over, they were treated like any fellow staffer would be treated. They were not met at the gates. They were treated very inhospitable by the Clintons, and I think that's a reflection of the Clintons' mindset toward the military. So whether you were a 4-star general or a private, they were all treated the same, mostly with very little respect and very little knowledge about why you were there. I mean, when I was there, I had a young female staffer talked to me one day about my experiences in the Air Force. Didn't know that I had a college degree, or that you had to have a college degree to become an officer. And then I said, oh, by the way, most of us, or at least half of us in the Air Force officers, have our doctorates or our masters. She couldn't believe it. She thought we were all high school dropouts, basically, who had no other options in life, and were forced into the military kind of as a backdoor conscription,
right,
because we had nothing else going for us. That was a very prevalent and pervasive mindset on the part of the Clintons as well as the staffers. And there was always a very clear line drawn. And I was in the inner circle. I mean, I had access to the Oval Office and to the residence, and there was always a very clear line drawn between the Clinton administration and the political appointees and the military guys. I mean, it was very, very clear. We never crossed that line. They never felt comfortable getting to know us, and vice versa. I have to tell you, I didn't really like being around them either. So just a real ignorance, I think, on their part.
One of the things that you mentioned at the breakfast meeting also was in regard to one of the presidential frontrunners right now, Hillary Clinton. Can you tell us some personal observations about her character, about who she is? What kind of a person is she really behind the scenes?
Well, first and foremost, she's very intelligent, but I would say that's about as far as I would compliment her. And I think she's vindictive. I think she's very evil. I think she's got a huge ego, and it's all about the power that she can attain, the power that she can hold. When I first arrived there, one of the first things my predecessor told me about life in the White House was to make sure that if she was in the hallways, to make sure that she didn't have to exchange pleasantries or good mornings or good afternoons with you. You were supposed to be out of her eyesight, no eye contact on the part of you or anybody else in the White House and the First Lady. And I think that shows you how imperial she is and was, and how imperial the Clinton White House was. And here you had senior staffers, adults diving in doorways, getting out of the hallway to have her avoid having to say good morning to us or good afternoon to us. And that's who she was. She didn't, again, she had a...
It wasn't personal. It was just the way she was.
That's the way she was.
I want to make that clear, that it wasn't just because she didn't like somebody.
It was everybody.
Yeah,
it was
right.
everybody. It wasn't just the military guys.
And you mentioned that she held nothing back when she was talking to Bill Clinton either.
Very profane woman, and very quick to anger. Which I think she's the point of being irrational, obviously. And at times, I question: do we want someone like that with their finger on the nuclear button? I mean, I can't imagine we want some person prone to flying off the handle at a moment's notice, in charge of a nuclear arsenal. And I think that's who she is and who she would be.
One of the other things that I was going to mention is that after the success of your first dereliction of duty book was what was the next one?
The Reckless Disregard.
Now, what's Reckless Disregard about?
It's a kind of a dereliction of duty sequel. It talks about not just the Clinton administration, but how Democrats in general have abused the military since the 1960s. I wrote it during the campaign of John Kerry in 2004. It talks about John Kerry's experience in Vietnam. It talks about the Democratic Party in general. It really, in the thesis is, since John F. Kennedy, they've been hijacked. The Democratic Party has been hijacked by the radical left, and the military and our nation's security has suffered since then.
Let me bring to the point here for the people that are watching. You're a radio talk show host. You have what's called Buzzcut once a week. Now, that's on the web, or is that on regular radio?
It's on the web and regular radio now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then you're on righttalk.com. That's
the same network.
Is that a blog, or is that an actual?
That's a radio network, internet radio network. It also now has on-air stations in 5 cities.
So we can hear you there too as well. Okay. And that is that a regular programming process for you, or?
Yeah, I'm on sabbatical right now. Done it for about 3 years. I'm on sabbatical right now. We'll be going back to them soon. And I also do a show every Wednesday night that actually airs on KABC. It's called Outside the Wire. I'm the military analyst on that show. It's hosted by a guy named Kevin Wall, great talk show host. So every Wednesday night in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles, you can hear me on talking about the war in Iraq, politics, Clinton administration.
So if somebody wants to email you, they can just go to righttalk.com.
They can go there. They can go to buzzpatterson.com.
All right.
Two Z's and 2 T's, and I get that's my website.
All right. Now that we have that sort of way, there's a whole area that we want to discuss in the second half of our show, and that's what I'm waiting for. I'm going to let Larry ask a few questions here, but in the second half of our show that's coming up, I want to ask you a lot about Iraq and about your experiences in Iraq, about what you did and what you foresee, and then furthermore down the line is the election coming up in November.
Sure.
Larry, any questions you have more?
Buzz, it was really a pleasure to hear you speak this morning.
Thank you very much.
With a standing room only crowd. Could you hold up your book, War Crimes, in front of you, please, just so that people can see this is the latest? You know, the cover tells what it's all about. It's the 5th column. Could you explain to people what the theme of this book was?
Yeah. War crimes, in my mind, the left has been really quick to use war crimes to denigrate our military. They talk about Guantanamo Bay and talk about Abu Ghraib, the prison, and I think the real war crimes are being committed by the left in this country against our military. And I break it down in the book to the 5th column in five elements. I think it's big media. I think it's Democratic politicians. I think it's these anti-war organizations like Code Pink for Peace, United for Peace and Justice. I think it's Hollywood popular culture. It's the people like MoveOn.org that fund these organizations, and it's also it's prevalent on our college campuses. It's the academia. It's the 1960s students that protested the war who now have tenure and are college presidents and professors and deans that are indoctrinating our youth today to be anti-military, anti-American.
Did Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky send you Christmas cards this
No,
year?
they did not. They're in here.
Yes,
They're
they
definitely
are.
in here.
Now,
Yes.
why would you? Let's let the people on the
elaborate.
inside know about the people that are watching.
Professors that are
Professors that if you go to any major college campus,
give me the two names again, real
Noam
strong.
Chomsky and Howard Zinn probably
All right.
have
Who are
more.
they?
They are both anti-American, anti-military professors who cut their teeth in the anti-war movement of the 1960s. Howard Zinn wrote a book called The People's History. It talks about the history of America from a socialist, communist standpoint. Everything from Christopher Columbus to today is done because we are capitalist, fascist pigs. Basically, if you listen to if you read Howard Zinn, Noam Chomsky goes further. Noam Chomsky probably is the sensei of the left. He is the spiritual leader of the secular progressives. He has been anti-American, anti-military since the 1960s. He has called the Pentagon the vilest institution on the face of the earth, for example. He even visited North Vietnam when we were at war with North Vietnam. He visited there on behalf of the Communist Party and the communists in Hanoi. Noam Chomsky is probably the most widely read radical on the face of the planet. If you go to any college campus today, you're going to find Noam Chomsky and Howard Zinn proudly championed. And that's where a lot of our college students get their anti-military bent today.
So these are more cultural leaders than they really are just even above their own intellect.
They are, and in fact, I will tell you.
Now, wait a minute. Let's be very clear about this, because I'm going to get in big trouble if I don't mention this. You happen to work with a guy by the name of David Horowitz, who just so happens to be Noam Chomsky's most vile opponent on the planet. Those two guys are two personalities at great odds with each other. So, having said that, tell me about your relationship with David Horowitz, and so that the Chomsky people don't write us and say you didn't mention
Well,
that.
David Horowitz is a good friend of mine, and David probably, I have to say, when I started reading about politics in this country and what was actually happening culturally in this country, I didn't know David yet. I knew him through his readings, his writings, basically, and he probably has done more to influence me in terms of my theories and my ideology than anybody else in the country. So David Horowitz you're exactly right. He is the anti-Noam Chomsky. He is the anti-Howard Zinn. But I happen to think David's right, and the other guys are wrong. I will also say that David's experience, David was one of them back in the 1960s. He was a radical leftist. He was a communist. He was the editor of Ramparts magazine at UC Berkeley back in the 60s. He was one of these guys.
Well, because he did write a book. We don't want to spend too much time with this, but David Horowitz did write a book about the 1,000 most dangerous. What were they?
The 101 most dangerous professors, and he also wrote a book called.
And I got to find out. So what's Chomsky on his list? Do we know?
You know, Chomsky didn't make number one, which I
I think
thought
it's
was
around 20. I think.
Yeah, I think
He's
that was.
in the list.
I think David did that intentionally. He was in there though, and so was Zinn. I think if you ask David honestly where he ranks Chomsky, he probably would say that he's the number one most damaging academic on the face of the planet. So,
Okay, Larry, wrap this up.
There's another person that you mentioned in the book, and that what did John Kerry tell the students at Pasadena City College? I don't think you elaborated that in the book, right?
I mentioned it. I talked a little bit about it. You know, basically, John Kerry, what he told the students at Pasadena College was what most leftists think about the military. If you're too stupid, you get stuck in Iraq. If you're dumb and you don't get your degrees, you get stuck in Iraq.
Okay.
And that's what he was alluding to, was that the left believes. And I talk about a lot of the myths that the left has about the military.
Right.
One of them is that you're too stupid to do anything else to go into the military. If you're poor, if you're a minority, if you're ignorant, you end up in the military, which is not the case. And I prove that, to be honest, without a doubt, in the book War Crimes.
We're going to wrap this segment with that thought in mind, and thanks so much. We'll be right back with Cutting Edge. And we're back with Lieutenant Colonel Buzz Patterson here on the Cutting Edge. And Colonel, let me grasp some things here. You were, as we said in the first half, you were with the Clinton administration for a couple of years, right there on the cutting edge with those people. You did mention, though, that you did some things after that in Iraq. Tell us why you would go to Iraq and how that happened.
Well, after my second book, we went to war in Iraq.
And the second book was?
Reckless Disregard.
Okay.
And then after my second book, I had a lot of friends still in the services that were serving in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, who I stayed in close touch with. After the invasion of 2003, I started hearing from these folks that what we were being told back here was not the case, was not the ground truth over there. So I went to Iraq in the summer of 2005 and embedded myself with our troops over there to talk to our guys and girls to see what they were seeing, what they were experiencing, what they were hearing back from the States in terms of was the New York Times accurate? Was the Washington Post accurate? Was Guantanamo Bay really a bad place to be? What happened at Abu Ghraib? All these places, these things that went out of proportion, basically, back in the States.
Serious investigative reporting.
Yeah, and really, I wanted to talk to the soldiers themselves. I mean, I had my theories about why we were being undermined back here in terms of the war with the media. I talk about those things in War Crimes, but I wanted the soldiers to have their voice. In fact, one of my segments of my radio show is called Soldiers' Voices, where I have soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan call in, and I interview them directly from the battlefield. So I get there, the straight, right from the horse's mouth, as it were. And so I went and talked to hundreds and hundreds of our soldiers, the sailors and airmen, Marines, and they all told me, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that what was happening back here was not what was happening. We were not being told the straight scoop overseas, what was actually happening. So I went over there myself to find out, and that was the genesis for War Crimes.
So how long were you there? You were an in-bed? Were you an in-bed reporter?
I was. I spent most of my time at Camp Victory, though, because that's where most of the guys and girls come and go. And they come back from their patrols. They come back from they go out to the field for a while. They come back through Camp Victory to eat, and to rest, and to cleaned up a little bit. So I spent most of my time there because it gave me a better cross
See,
section.
where's Camp Victory? Is that in the green zone?
No. It's outside. It's actually west of Baghdad. It's west and north of the airport. So it's outside the green zone. It's one of our biggest bases outside of.
Yeah, you didn't
downtown.
mention that to me, but how many months or days did you spend
I
there?
was just there a few weeks. I was
Okay, a
just there,
few
in and
weeks.
Out. Yeah, in and out.
And you were based there. Did you get to go to any other part of Iraq?
I just did things in and around Baghdad. Didn't
Okay.
go north, didn't go south. I just wanted to again get a feel for each of the services. I wanted to get a feel for the Iraqis, the Iraqi army. That was all being done right there. Also, I got a chance to speak to General Hassim, who is the Iraqi general in charge of their training program for the Iraqi army. So
And did you go out on patrols?
I did.
All right. Now, one of the things that we constantly hear from superb media outlets like CNN is that it's too dangerous to go out on patrol, and it's too dangerous to even walk the streets of anywhere in Baghdad, and it's too dangerous to even leave the green zone. So those are the things that we've heard. Now, what?
Let me tell you
This
what-
is back 3 years ago. So was it better then, or what?
It's better now probably. But let me tell you what my experiences were in the summer 2005. I started asking these guys that I was with, where was CNN? Where was the Washington Post? Where were the Washington Post, New York Times, the LA Times? And they said, oh, so they never leave the green zone. So as a matter of fact, there's two hotels in the green zone, the Al Rashid Hotel, the Palestine Hotel, which is where all the journalists, the Western journalists stay. Our guys who claim to be war correspondents are hanging out at the pool or the bar at the Al Rashid Hotel watching Al Jazeera. And that's how they get their information on what's happening in the war. Then they go to the top of the hotel, do their hair, put on a suit or a tie for the live feed back to the States. That's how the war is being reported. The guys that are actually embedded out there, there's some amazing bloggers that have embedded themselves. They're doing a great job. But our mainstream media has chosen not to leave the green zone.
That's the other thing that's not very clear. Are there independent journalists out there?
There are independent journalists. In fact, two of the best. Michael Yan has done a tremendous job. He went over there at the very beginning of this whole situation in Iraq, and has been there ever since. Independent, great blogger, great photographer. And a guy named Bill Roggio also has been over there doing the same kind of thing. And if it weren't for those guys, and it weren't for the military bloggers, people like Black 5 or Mudville Gazette or LT Smash, some of these guys that were there at the very beginning blogging from their tents in Iraq and Afghanistan, we wouldn't know the story. We would not know that the New York Times had been in running us on the truth. We wouldn't know that the Washington Post had not been telling us exactly what's happening overseas, because you're not going to get it from those mainstream sources.
There's a bit of clarity that's missing here regarding the role that Iran plays in, has played, and since the end of the actual physical war, and then what's going on now, and there's a lot of conjecture about the Fedayeen, the foreign fighters, the holy warriors that are being sent from all over Islamdom to come over to fight the evil American troops. So can you bring some clarity just from your point of view, just from your exposure, what the extent of the impact from the Fedayeen are, and what's try to clear it up for us.
I'll tell you what I know to be true a couple of years ago, and what I know to be true today. There were, in my time over there were a substantial number of disaffected Baathists and people, Sunnis who had been displaced after our.
These are locals.
These are locals.
All right.
But even then, I think maybe in my time there, the most they were probably 20% of the overall insurgency. The other 80% being foreign fighters who were coming in from Syria, from Iran, from places like Saudi Arabia, from places like Pakistan. That has not changed. In fact, I think right now the foreign figures are probably even higher than 80% now.
Why would the media and major media downplay the foreign fighters and constantly say it's just a civil war?
Because by painting the war as a civil war and us being responsible for it, it allows them to side with the Iraqi people as being on the good side and us being on the wrong side. When in fact it's never been the Iraqi people. It's been a hardcore group of former Baathists, yes, no doubt about it. But by and large, the Shia, with the exception of a few of the militias, and the Kurds have not been involved at all. It has been predominantly, we created, I think, a killing field. And it's been, we created a vacuum that's been filled up in Iraq with foreigners, Al-Qaeda members that are being sent in, Hezbollah, Hamas, trained people who have been sent in to fight America on the fields of Iraq and not elsewhere.
That's what I was going to mention to you. That I'm glad you brought that up. But because what about the Shia Mahdi army, the Sadr army? It was very intense for a while, then it stopped, and then intense again, and now it's kind of coming full circle again. So tell us what role does this guy play in the process? And this is just in the Baghdad area, which you were pretty pointed to, right?
Yeah, I mean this
is like a ghetto in
he's on the southern
New York.
side. He's the southern side of Baghdad is predominantly Shia. The northern side is predominantly Sunni.
All right.
Al-Sadr is the sheikh. He is the leader of the Shia movement on the southern side of the ghettos.
The Mahdi army, right?
Mahdi army.
Right.
And when, as I said in my speech earlier today, one of our biggest mistakes was not going in there and whacking him on day one. We should have done that. I think we thought we could negotiate and work with people like that. We found out we were wrong.
Right.
And we also were, again, I think we went in with winning the hearts and minds, letting that sort of philosophy overtake us. And we didn't want to go in and fight a full-blown war. We believed we could go in and talk to these folks. They would help us out, and they showed us they couldn't.
Well, what is the impact of Sistani on Al-Sadr? Any at all or none?
Well, I think Sistani showed Sadr the way he should have gone. I mean, I think we thought when we had Sistani helping us out, at least supporting us, I think we thought Al-Sadr would join Sistani, as they are the two biggest, obviously representing their people, the two biggest figureheads.
He's sort of the Jerry Falwell of Iraq,
yeah.
right?
He is. He really is. And I think that, again, we underestimated Al-Sadr. Al-Sadr's been getting a lot of help. In fact, when Al-Sadr fled, he went to Iran. So he's been getting a lot of help from the Iranians, not only money, but also support through insurgency and training for the militias.
American people are going to ask one question: why can't we shut down the borders and stop the Iranians coming in with their Fedayeen foreign fighters and especially the IED materials?
Right. Well, I asked that same question of General Hassim when I was over in Iraq, and he says, well, you can't close your borders either, control your borders either, which he's exactly right. And they've got a much more difficult situation because they've got 5,000 years of trade routes in caves and tunnels and in mountainous terrain, much more difficult to control than what we have. And again, you talk about 5,000 years of these trade routes controlled by tribal areas, by tribes in these tribal areas, these mountainous areas. You're just not going to do it. You're just not going to do it. And I think that
how is the surge working in your opinion?
I think it's working very well. And a combination of things. I think a lot of Americans get hung up on the increase of troops. But not only did we increase the troops in the surge, but General Petraeus changed the rules. He changed the ROE, the rules of engagement. And he also started working more with the Sunni tribal leaders to show them that we weren't the bad guys, it was Al-Qaeda.
How did he change the rules of engagement? Can you reveal anything? Probably not.
I can't go into a lot of detail.
Okay,
I can say that he took off. We had two hands tied behind our back, and then we got 1.5.
Okay, that's good. That's really good. Larry.
I got a question for you on, and our friend General McNerney, in his book Baghdad Ablaze, he talks about the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Qaeda in the Great War on Terror, and they're being Iranians who were in Iraq helping us, yet they're on our list of 42 terrorist organizations. How do you feel about that? I
don't think that's a good idea. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who think that we ought to turn those people loose, and I agree with that. I mean, I think that we have treated them as a terrorist organization. They are the future, I think, to overthrowing the current government in Tehran. I don't know enough about them that I wouldn't trust them with my family, but they seem to have the inroads to the change in Iran that we want to see. So, I mean, I think that's a State Department issue. I've got a lot of problems with the State Department. I mean, I think that they've done a horrible job in Iraq.
You know, one of the things he points out is that we cut a deal with Tehran that we would bomb their camps in Iraq during March and April of 2003, just as Baghdad fell. And all of a sudden, they sent all of their supporters over.
Right. So,
you know, we were had on that one. Talk to us about the Kurds. What were you doing, the 96 President Cup? Where were you? Why don't you share with our viewers?
That was it. That was actually my first couple of months on the job as President Bill Clinton's.
So you got to go play golf, okay.
I was watching golf.
Okay.
I didn't. He never invited me to play golf in my 2 years there. That's still a point of contention I have with President. On this day, though, in 1996, September 1996.
You had a better handicap than he did.
He hit the ball a long way.
Okay.
But
moving right along.
not always strict, but in September 1996, Saddam's forces were rising up to try to suppress the Kurds and annihilate the Kurds in the northern part of Iraq. We had pledged our support to the Kurds.
That's right.
As a government, as the Pentagon, and this day we had fighters and bombers in the air to support the Kurds and to repel Saddam's forces. And on this day, the president and I were attending a professional golf tournament in Manassas, Virginia, and he received 3 phone calls. Actually, I received 3 phone calls from Sandy Berger, who at the time was the National Security Council advisor to the president, asking me to get to the president to get the go-ahead to launch the attacks and to support the Kurds. And on 3 occasions, the president refused to take the phone calls from his senior foreign policy advisor. So that was my first insight into the man that we were about to re-elect as our commander-in-chief for a second time. What happened, unfortunately, because the president would take the phone calls, would not make a decision, the Kurds were overrun. We did not support our allies in Iraq, and Saddam's forces killed several thousand. So
one of the things I'm going to interrupt here, Larry, for one question because I'll forget. On 60 Minutes about a year ago, they had a wonderful program about the Kurds and how the Kurds are getting along well with the Americans.
That's very true.
And it's like night and day between, the Kurds, Kurdish area of Iraq and let's say the south or the middle.
Right.
So what did you hear when you were over there? Did you hear anything about this? Or?
That's definitely the case. In fact, when I was over there, as far as 3 years ago now, almost, especially today, there's tourism in the northern part of Iraq. People are going to Iraq, staying in the hotels. I mean, it's a great place. It's very green. It's beautiful.
They were just about to open an airport there, I think.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, what has happened on the downside of that is they've chased Al Qaeda out of Ramadi and Al Anbar. They have gone up into the north. So we have basically chased the rats up into the Kurdish part of the country, which heretofore has been the safest part of the country.
Is that why we're having events up in Mosul and all that area?
Yeah. We have cleaned out the parts around Baghdad and Al Anbar and Sunni Triangle that were our worst, where all the rats were hiding. We've got them on the run now. They're going to places where they feel like they can get safe haven. Right now, it happens to be the north. Eventually, we'll be able to get them out.
John McCain is running for the presidency of the United States, and Hillary Clinton mentioned the other day that he wants to stay there 100 years. You're a military man. You're not a general or great strategic planner, but hey, based on what you've seen and so on, no matter who wins the election in November of 2008, how long do you think we're going to be hanging around Iraq?
Well, I hope we're there for an awfully long time. I think it's very important for us to be there, to have that foothold in the region, right next door to Syria, right next door to Iran, right next door to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. In Jordan, I think it's essential. We've built some tremendous bases in Iraq. I think Iraq will be a staunch ally for a long, long time. I don't care who the president is. If we initiate a precipitous withdrawal from Iraq, we'll create a vacuum. It will. The post-Vietnam years when we had like 2.5 million Cambodians and Vietnamese killed by the communist governments will pale in comparison. Yeah, and I think that we'll basically be handing over the oil fields of Iraq to the Iranians and also to Al Qaeda. And I can't imagine we want to face that issue 2 years down the road. So I'm hoping that we're there for a long time. We're still in Germany, we're still in Japan, we're still in South Korea. So I hope we're in Iraq for a long time. I think it's essential that we are. Because of this threat we face is global. It's not just the insurgency in Iraq; it's global, and we've got to be in that region for a long time to come.
So Hillary says that she's going to draw out all the troops within 60 days.
Number one, that's impossible. That's logistically impossible.
Okay.
Maybe in 6 months to a
Couldn't
year.
even clear out the PX in 60 days. No.
You could not. You couldn't get everybody out. You can get all the stuff out of there in time. It
Exactly.
would take about a year.
Sure.
Easily a year.
Okay.
So number one, that's impossible.
All right.
And highly improbable.
Right.
So, and I think it just shows you how ignorant. If they actually believe that, if Hillary believes that, and if Barack Obama believes something similar to that, it shows you how ignorant they are. And they either are that completely ignorant to the military, or they're putting their own political aspirations above what's best for the country. And I think that's probably the case. But that's physically impossible to do.
Okay, any last questions on
Yeah, I've
Iraq?
got a comment for you. I'm going to shift from Iraq. I'm going to go to a book by Gary Bernstein called Jawbreaker. He was a CIA operative. He was going after bin Laden in Tora Bora. And you confirmed something he said today where the Clinton White House didn't want to pull the trigger.
Right, on several occasions.
So he's confirming, or you're confirming what he had to say.
Right.
We have 3 people, front runners right now. Are any of them, or who would you say is least qualified to be commander-in-chief based on the rhetoric?
Well, least qualified is probably Obama. I think the one that scares me the most is probably Mrs. Clinton. I think we're being forced to face a lesser of 3 evils, essentially, and I think that's going to be McCain.
Tell us about that. What Senator John McCain faces from a lot of the veteran groups and so on.
Well, John McCain, what he has going for him is he is one of us, and he was a POW, a war hero in Vietnam, and he has worn the uniform, and he's got sons serving in the military right now. What he, I think, is going to have a hard time with is the fact that he's not well respected by many in the military. He's not even well respected by many who served with him in Vietnam and in the Hanoi Hilton. So he has another one of those credibility issues, similar to John McCain, similar to John Kerry, not quite as bad as John Kerry, because of course McCain was there for 7 years and Kerry was there for 4 months. So a big discrepancy, and I think McCain was a fighter pilot. And he was shot down, and I think he's got that going for him.
Yeah, but you pilots all stick together.
Not the naval aviator versus the Air Force aviator.
I was going to
Get
say.
these branches straight.
Exactly right.
Really?
Yeah, he's a Navy guy. That's not confuse that.
We're going to talk about that, but I one of the issues that McCain, Obama, Hillary Clinton, they're going to be one of those 3 people, and with some other player that we don't know yet.
Right.
It may be leading our country here in November of 2008, and for 4 years at least.
Right.
So it's sort of a weird election, isn't it?
Well, it's a very critical one. Unfortunately, I think that we are. I can't imagine another time in my life where we face such a critical point in our nation's history. We are at war. We're fighting a global evil. I think every bit as evil, if not more so, than we faced last century against fascism and Nazism and communism. I think we are fighting, I think, the 4th World War in a way, and we are at the same time we're doing that, faced with selecting a president, commander-in-chief, none of which I think are ultimately qualified for the position.
Okay, let's go to your. You mentioned a couple of the organizations like Code Pink and some of the other more radical groups,
Right.
As being very much against the United States and so on. But having said that, how do you counter their argument that this was just a made-up thing, that this was that 9/11 was some kind of this conspiracy, and that George Bush was just getting even for his father's problems with Saddam Hussein, and that's why we went to war.
You're wagging the dog.
We have been at war with radical Islam since 1979. 1979 was when the Ayatollah seized our embassy in Tehran. 444 days, diplomats. We've been out fighting as radical Islam since then. We have been attacked, my count, at least 53 times since 1979, abroad most of the time. We've been attacked by radical fundamentalist Islamists since 1979, at least 53 times, to include 8 times during the 1990s and 9/11, obviously. We've been fighting this war for a long time. I think most of us, on both sides of the aisle, have chosen to, we were slow to wake up to the threat that we are facing today. Much like we were against Nazism and Hitler, much like we were against communism and Soviet Union, we have slowly awakened to the threat. We're there now. We were attacked on our shores, not once, but for a second time on 9/11. So we've got to come to the fact that we are at war. We'll be at war for a long time. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be a generational war, much like last century, where hopefully my kids won't be fighting it, but I foresee probably will be facing the same threat. So generational war. 9/11 was it was bound to happen sooner or later. It won't be the last time we're attacked in this country. It will happen again. So far we've been successful in not being attacked again.
Give us your best guess on something that it's pure speculation, but I think it's worthy of your possible thought process. You have all these different terrorist groups.
Right.
And then you have these groups spread all over the world, like Shining Path and the ones down in the FARC area of Colombia, and you've got them all over the place. All these different terrorist organizations. So, do you believe that they are connected in any way?
Well, they do in some cases work together. There are elements of Al Qaeda in over 80 different countries. Is it the same Al Qaeda we're facing in Pakistan? Not always. but in some cases they are aligned with each other. The group in the Philippines, for example, in Malaysia, the groups in Africa, they all work with each other. In some cases they take the direction from bin Laden, in some cases they don't, but they all have the same thing in mind. That's the overthrow of our government. That's the Sharia law. It's the spread of the caliphate across the world. It's the reclamation. It's a payback for the Crusades. It's a reclamation of what Muhammad saw 1,400 years ago.
So it's really it's you're saying, and we can't cut terms there. It's basically a religious war.
I think it is. Yeah.
All right.
I most definitely think it is. I think we are too quick. We are so politically correct in this country not to call it that.
Yes.
But I think it is. In fact, I wouldn't be opposed to another crusade in the region. I mean, I don't think it's the smartest thing in the world, but I think that we are going to be faced with that. I mean, it's either them or us. We seem to be a lot more tolerant of them than they are of us.
Well, one of the issues is the leadership of our country. We're at a crossroads now.
Absolutely.
And so from what we see we haven't got a real clear choice. I don't think Democrats, Republicans, Independents, Green Party, I don't see any real clear choice in this coming up election. Do you?
Let me jump in for a minute, though, and then I'd like you to answer. Because in war crimes, you're quoting Senator McCain to say, the military is a career I would not recommend for my son at this period in time. I guess the question is, when did he make that statement, and what effect would that have on recruiting?
Well, he made it a couple of years ago, and I think it's troubling that he would ever make that statement, because I think it does play into the hands of what the left would have us believe, is that the military is a backward draft. We have a backward economic draft, basically, of people who are not qualified to do anything else. At this time, what a horrible thing to say about when we are trying to recruit quality people into services, and we are it's an all volunteer force, obviously, so we want people to volunteer for it. What does that say? I mean, to me, it's the same thing as John Kerry saying you're too stupid. If you're too stupid, you wind up in Iraq. I mean, that is a mindset and a myth that came out of the Vietnam War that persists today, because it plays to the fact the left needs victims, and the victims in this case are the military members who are forced to come into the military, not because they want to serve or because they're patriotic or because they're talented, but because they have no other option.
Would you say it borders on treason, the comments made by Murtha, Reid, and Pelosi?
Absolutely. Especially when for example, anytime if you're a Democratic congressman or senator, and you say something on the House or the Senate floor, and it plays on Al Jazeera 15 minutes later, you probably overstepped your bounds. You probably ought to be shut up.
I call it more demagoguery than really being treasonous, because when you're trying to work the people up and say that this is.
But I would agree with that. But when it crosses the water's edge,
yes.
When you do say something like the war can't be won, for example, or that the Marines Haditha killed in cold-blooded murderers,
right?
And that plays, and that inflames the Arab Street, and the Arab Street is able to recruit more people to go kill Americans in Iraq. That's where I think you cross the line. I think we used to have a great tradition in this country where we didn't take politics beyond the ocean shores of our nation to the battlefield. Now we have politicians who are immediately quoted in Al Jazeera, on Al Arabiya, on Al Qaeda websites. 5 minutes after they say something stupid like that, it plays to Al Qaeda. It's a recruiting tool for Al Qaeda, and it also results in Americans being killed.
One of the things I want to just mention is that that we've come a long way from the days of Ronald Reagan, when he said don't talk negatively about fellow Republican candidates. It used to be in this country that politicians, elected people that represent us in any body, did not say anything negative against their country in public.
That's right.
They were certainly welcome to write on things and to say anything they wanted to in writing, but they weren't allowed to come out because there was a censure process. But evidently, we don't have any censure process in the Congress or anywhere else in this country.
We've forgotten how to use it. And now you have politicians, elected officials, you have former presidents that are doing it. You've got Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. Bill Clinton goes to within miles of the battlefield and tells Arab students that Iraq was a mistake. He's a former president, a former commander-in-chief. I mean, whether you believe that, you keep it to yourself. If you want to give a speech in the States, talk about that, that's one thing. Don't go to the battlefield to talk about that. Al Gore goes to Saudi Arabia and says it was a mistake. Jimmy Carter, I don't know what he's smoking or drinking these days, but he has just gone off the deep end as well. Now, There used to be a tradition where presidents didn't badmouth each other either. You've got Jimmy Carter calling President Bush all kinds of names, and I think we have lost the civility.
Hold that book back up again. This is your war crimes book. Let me see if I can get this on camera a little bit. I got to back off a little bit. But let me see.
The cover says it all.
Yeah, but what I was going to say, Colonel Patterson, and I'm going to give you that rank because you didn't take it when you had the opportunity. But Colonel Patterson, this book nails down some of these things that we were just talking about the fifth column, the subtle fifth column, whether it's the media, whether it's elected politicians or past politicians or whatever.
And where can people get a copy of this book?
Well, any of your bookstores, obviously. Amazon.com is a great place to get it. And then go to the Buzz Patterson website and get it there as well. But Amazon.com probably is the best place to get it, the quickest way to get it. It's been out for a few months, doing very, very well, and I guarantee you the left doesn't want you to read it because it does expose them in all of their shenanigans, and it does, I think. And the beauty of the book really is it's not Buzz Patterson. It's my theory. But it's the soldiers, it's the voices of the soldiers. It's people like Sergeant Eddie Jeffers telling you how he feels about what's happening in Iraq. It's people like Sergeant Jeff Newting, how he feels about what's going on in Iraq. Major Eric Eglin. These are people I quote that I met on the battlefields of Iraq. These are the people telling you what's actually happening to your country and to their war.
Lieutenant Colonel Buzz Peterson, thank you so very much for joining us on The Cutting Edge. It was a real pleasure to make your acquaintance, meet with you, and we look forward to great things ahead for you. And
thank you very much.
And we can't wait for your next book.
Thanks very much. Great to be here. Thanks so much, guys.